All right, Adam, it's been some time for our listeners, but for you and I, it has been what feels like ages in our
Mere
hearts.
moments. Mere moments.
Mere moments. Mere moments apart.
I live
that
and
we are
breathe you,
recording
man.
these. Aw. But do you know how to quit me? That's the real question.
I don't know. You complete me.
Oh, wow. You don't have to complete me. I was going to ask, I mean, neither you nor I have ever run our fingers through each other's hair like the vice president got this past week.
That is true.
How do you feel about that? I don't feel like you love me as much as Erica Kirk loves JD Vance.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think so either. She just likes him very, very, very much. I wish there was a lot of women in this world who liked me that much.
Wow. Really telling on yourself there.
Man, that's a friendship. That is some friendship.
I feel like
I think if a woman did that to me and was photos of that, I think my wife might want to have a conversation with me.
I feel like you should have a conversation with your wife regardless. Just saying,
honey,
buddy.
I do not get enough of hands through my hair from other women. And I think that needs to be discussed. I want to be loved JD Vance is.
You know what? All right. So you and I have to do something important. We have to start that death pool for major politicians. Mm-hmm. Right. And we gotta start putting bets out there. The other one we got to do is we got to have a tracker, like a public tracker of whom JD Vance has killed. Because now we're at Charlie Kirk and the Pope so far. Like the man is basically the Grim Reaper for anyone who's famous.
Was there another one? I don't know. Was there somebody right after the Pope?
I think there was. I think there was someone between the Pope and...
which made it like a
Charlie
thing
Kirk.
where like, be afraid of this guy. Oh. It wasn't Charlie Kirk,
well,
was it? He didn't see Charlie Kirk right before, did he?
No, I think... Was that right around the time of Trump's disappearance? And everyone thought that...
What's possible?
Yeah. Again, that's what I'm saying. We got to have a more public tracker. We got to start doing that. Maybe that's what I know you and I want to record tomorrow, so maybe we should do that.
Okay. Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right. But everyone, welcome back to Idiot Seeking Village. Rich here again with Adam as always. And we're going to continue our little bit here about protests and some historical parallels. So we just left off with Hong Kong. Adam, let's move on to Poland. So we're going to do a little bit of background. It's actually weirdly similar to Hong Kong in a lot of ways, the last 200 years or so of history that's kind of led up, especially like the last 50 years that have led up to the current situation, or at least the situation leading up to the protests that we want to talk about. It's oddly similar, and I didn't realize that kind of going in, which is, I think, pretty cool. We also had the opportunity to speak to a relative of mine who had actually lived through the situation. So as I was able to pull up some quotes and conversations of the Hong Kong protests over the last 10 years and give a little bit of context as to how that felt and not just what was going on. We were able to do so in person for the first time, which is pretty exciting. So I think we've got a lot that we want to kind of cover here and go through. There's a lot of similarities and a couple of key differences. So Poland, as I said, somewhat similar history as Hong Kong. It was carved up by competing imperial powers, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, back at the end of the 1800s, end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s. And so it ceased to exist as a sovereign country for the entirety of the 19th century. And at the end of World War I, the now German, Austro-Hungarian, and Russian empires all collapsed. And that left a power void in the East, on the Eastern Front, and an opportunity for Polish nationalists who had been very, strongly nationalist, but didn't have a political opening to do anything about it. So a man named Józef Piłsudski, he was a Polish commander who had actually raised legions to fight on behalf of the Austro-Hungarians during the war, was released from prison and sent back to stabilize the collapsing Eastern Front. He rallied various local Polish councils, and through some diplomacy and some wars, by March of 1921, Poland was recognized as a fully established parliamentary European state. This is called the Second Polish Republic. And it stayed that way until the freaking Germans were invited over for milk and cookies, and they decided that
they wanted to stay.
They had one second place World War participation trophy. That wasn't enough, and they decided to stay, and they were a bunch of jerks. And that stayed that way until after the war, when Poland then fell under Soviet occupation. But much like Hong Kong strikes and protests happened throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Poland, right? So just because they were under Soviet control doesn't mean that they were taking it quietly. And if you know anything about the Poles and the Russians, they fucking hate each other. They really hate each other. So there's a lot of very nationalistic, kind of very strong feelings about this. It was bad enough to be carved up by all these countries and largely under the control of the Germans and German-speaking peoples. It was another to be under the control of Soviets and the Russians, right? That was totally, in a lot of ways, unacceptable. So starting in 1956, workers went on the streets of Poznan, which was one of the largest cities in Poland, to demand economic and political changes. The demonstrations were suppressed brutally by the communist authorities at that time, with some hundreds of people killed.
Jeez.
A lot of intellectuals, again, that was a working class strike, they still hoped to reform the system from within. They didn't support the workers, and especially in a lot of their more radical demands. So you've got this kind of workers in the streets, and the intellectuals, the professionals are kind of staying back, right? They're like, this is not how we want to do things. 1968, a similar fate awaited students and intellectuals who protested for greater political freedoms at that point, right? So about 10 years later. Workers were brought in to stage demonstrations against the students who were labeled as hooligans and troublemakers. And the communist ruling class crushed the students and the intellectuals, right? So again, they're playing the two kind of working class and intellectual professional class against each other successfully. In 1970, workers demonstrated on the streets of the major the Baltic coastal cities and demanded higher wages and economic reforms. About 45 workers were killed and thousands were wounded during the unrest, while again, intellectuals and students stayed home and watched what was going on. So again, you've got this society that's under occupation by their neighbor whom they hate, right? They're ethnically, they hate the Russians. They're under this communist, this Soviet government that's been imposed upon them, and they don't have rights and freedoms, but they can't get their shit together, right? They cannot get on the same page. So starting in 1975, some constitutional amendments get proposed by the communist authorities. And essentially they wanted to reinforce the leading role of the Communist Party in society and formally commit Poland to what they called an eternal friendship with the Soviet Union. And at this point, again, the intellectuals and the academics and the students were like, fuck no, right? We have lost so much sovereignty already as Poles. We don't want to get even closer to the Soviets and to the Russians. So they started to mobilize again. And this was really the first time that the professional and the intellectual classes mobilized. Right. They had watched largely the students get crushed, and they had watched the working classes get crushed multiple times. This is really the first time the intellectuals went into the streets in the mid 70s. Then the government in 1976 started to announce price hikes, right? This is the 70s. There's a lot of inflation globally, and that triggers mass protests and strikes. The regime violently suppresses it. A lot of beaten and arrested workers. And this is when kind of the intellectuals and the workers started to ally together. And this is a key turning point in the opposition. They created something called the Committee for the Defense of Polish Workers. And they started to raise funds to provide legal aid to imprisoned workers, to financial support to the families. And it became the first major organized opposition group to kind of bridge that divide, right? So it's not just, hey, we're starting to get on the same page, but now we're actually kind of working actively together in an organized way. They continue to kind of, create more groups to hold the communist government that they were under accountable and for general international human rights commitments, right? They wanted to see things moving in a positive direction, and they weren't really getting that. So they started to get this framework for protests in the streets. And they also started to get this framework for how are we going to built toward this electorally, built toward this legislatively, and to put pressure on the government for political change. In 1977, an anti-communist activist, a student, is killed, presumably by security services at the time, and that shocks Poland, that shocks the nation. Nationwide protests erupt, and a lot of independent student organizations start to pop up and build, again, more of this shadow government, this kind of institutional support for the people that was going on at the time, and started to build towards. They started to print out alternative history to the Soviet official history, started to spread philosophy, literature, sociology, and economics, and challenging directly the state propaganda that was going on at the time. By the end of 1979, that was a huge, vibrant network. And they were just publishing, they had over 400 publications that were out there just spreading ideas and information that were banned under the government.
Crazy.
And starting to build this kind of grassroots network of, the Poles are a rebellious people, a stubborn people by nature. And again, they're under this government that they don't want, that's been imposed on them by a group of people that they hate. And now they're starting to kind of, instead of just being grumbling under the ground of like, I don't like this, it's now starting to be like, okay, how do we actually push these ideas and spread these ideas and get organized together? At the same time, 1978 is the Pope John Paul II gets voted in by the Vatican. He was the first non-Italian pope since, I think, the 16th century, and he visited Poland in 1979. And he did open-air masses in many of the major cities, and this was broadcast on state TV and radio at the time. And the Pope openly spoke about human rights, the right to freedom of expression and conscience. And so you've had this progressively building movement underground to support the Poles who wanted their freedom, who wanted to fight the communist state. And now you've got the freaking Pope coming out on live TV, on live radio, communist state-controlled networks, and he's calling for freedom of expression and conscience and human rights across this. So now you've got this mass movement that's happening, and you've got international backing. You've got the Pope essentially coming out there and quietly but publicly supporting this. And so I want to read a quote from a gentleman named Adam Michnik, who was one of Solidarity's leaders.
Damn, I thought it was going to be me.
Shortly after.
I really thought it was going to be me. I was hoping.
Yes, not you, Adam. No, a better Adam, obviously.
Sounds about right. That checks out.
Yeah. So he said, for decades, Poles referred to their government as they, without defining what us meant. But finally, because of the Pope's visit, Poles could finally visualize us. People realized that their strength was in numbers, and that helped to break a collective barrier of fear. And so at this point, they start to realize, and you hear this in America too, right? You hear they, them, the government, this and that. It's always this abstract of, opposition, right? And you hear it in left-wing media, you hear it in right-wing media, or I don't mean to say left-wing media, right? Mainstream, liberal media and right-wing media, right? It's always they, them. They're doing this to you. They're telling you this. You can't do this because of them.
It's the government's pronouns.
They, them is definitely the government's pronouns. Absolutely. 100%. Hundo P. Adam. Well done. They, them is always the government. But for the Poles, this was when it kind of coalesces. Okay, we know what they are, but what are we, right? What is us? How are we in opposition to this? And how do we define ourselves? Because they are not us. So what are we? And I think, pausing here for a moment, right? That's important. Like, we're Americans, but do we really define what us or we are in any of these protests, right? Any of these demands, right? No kings, 50-51, whatever. Again, we're standing against something, but what are we standing for? And what are we standing for as a group, as a nation, as citizens?
Yeah, it's always we aren't.
Do we have...
We aren't.
Right. It's not what are we?
Yeah.
I saw some commentary during the Portland protests back in 2020, and they were saying, right? Because think about the American flag, right? The American flag, especially in the last 10 years, the fucking flag has become politicized, right? Because the worst people you know are flying the American flag, just the most regressive, conservative, most Trumpy voters. And that turns people off. In a lot of ways, I feel like the American flag has lost some luster as a symbol for the nation. It's starting to divide. You see a giant flag and you think, oh God, like what is this guy's politics, right? You don't think he's just proud to be an American, right? It's started to change. And during those protests, people were saying, no, protesters should carry the flag. They should show that they are Americans too. And this is what Americans do and believe in. And this is how we need to define ourselves, that we are Americans. So I think it's a little bit of an interesting parallel there.
9/11, after 9/11, they kind of really bastardized the flag with like, oh, so every politician wears, you have to have your American flag lapel pin. You have to show that you're American. You have to show. It's like it's lost a lot of its true meaning. It's when you just hey, I'm just gonna throw it on. I'm just gonna wear it today. I'm gonna wear it every day. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore because I don't really care about the Americans. I only care about me and my money. But I'm gonna wear it to show that I'm an American. We got that point. You're a politician in America. You don't have to wear that 50-cent American lapel pin.
Yeah, exactly. It's become right, especially 9/11 is just such a turning point, and I think I don't want to get too off on a tangent here, but yeah, it for so many reasons such a turning point, and it's kind of devalued the flag in a lot of ways because everyone is suddenly waving it. Every politician has to have it under the lapel, and it's like, and you justify so much of the worst shit that we did, not only internationally but domestically, under the cover of that flag and what it meant as a symbol. And yeah, it lost its luster. And then, it just slowly became people who didn't like what was going on would look at it and be like, well, the people who are doing the worst shit are flying this flag all over the place. I don't really want to represent the same thing.
Yeah. What did you say?
Yeah. So anyway, moving forward a little bit here. So by 1980, there's food shortages, more inflation, another round of price hikes. And that triggered a new wave of strikes. Again, started kind of in the Baltic cities, the working coastal cities. There was a lot of shipping and whatnot. And workers started to form not just economic demands, right? We want more pay, better pay for the work that we're doing, the working class folks. But they also started to make political demands. And they wanted freedom of speech. They wanted independent trade unions. There was no unionization allowed. There was no independent unionization allowed right under Soviet occupation. And they also wanted political prisoners, people from the last few years who had gone out. They wanted them released, a lot of this. And so at this point, what started happening, again, now you've got these underground systems and networks, this kind of parallel government almost in a lot of ways that has been building up over the last few years. You've got the Pope coming in and calling for freedom and human rights. And now you've got the workers going, enough is enough. And not just we want better material conditions, but we want better better political conditions to go with those economic conditions. This is when it starts to become a shift from we're asking for things to we're challenging the Communist Party. And so this is, in the 80s, the birth of what's called the Solidarity Movement. A strike broke out, again, led by a gentleman named Lech Walesa, who ended up being the first president a few years later of the Restored Republic. And he had been an electrician. He'd been fired for his activism. So he's leading this strike. The strikes start to spread and are coordinated by some of these committees and these groups that are working together that kind of are starting to bring together the intellectual and the working class and the students with kind of more common goals and demands. And they start to go out there and they go, we demand independent unions. We demand the right to strike. We demand the right to free expression and access to media. And we want an improvement in our economic and living standards. And they went with, and I'm not actually sure where this comes from, but they had this strict nonviolent approach to it. Because I think, and this kind of goes, and we should maybe start diving into a little bit of the interview we went on yesterday. As we saw with Hong Kong in that last discussion, You start getting violent, then the security forces start getting more violent, right? And then it kind of starts to escalate. I think also there was definitely an atmosphere of fear. You were under Soviet occupation, but the communist government was fundamentally a Polish communist government. It wasn't Russians who were running the country. You have this legitimate fear that if things get out of control, that Russia, the Soviets, are going to send in the Red Army.
Right.
And they're going to crush the uprisings like they did in Hungary, like they did in Czechoslovakia in decades past, because the Warsaw Pact did that. They had crushed this. So I think, based on what I understand, and again, I didn't dig deeper on this prior to this conversation, that's the approach they took. They're like, we don't want tanks rolling in. We don't want the Red Army rolling in, because then we lose control of the situation and we lose our ability, right, to negotiate, at least amongst Poles, to get a resolution here. So basically, working class strikes largely in the port cities, and it's spreading. And finally, the government starts to recognize, after a few weeks of economic strikes and sanctions, the Solidarity movement as an independent self-governing union, which was unprecedented. That did not exist behind the Iron Curtain anywhere in the communist world under the Soviet Union's umbrella. Within months, in mid-1980, Solidarity's membership was over 10 million people, which was roughly 1/3 of the adult population of Poland at the time.
And why did Russia say, listen, what are you doing? Like, allow them to actually allow this?
So we're kind of getting to that point. Solidarity now, it's gone from this underground movement and kind of slowly the educated professional classes and the working classes slowly coming together and building these kind of parallel structures and spreading banned information underground. Now you have a public government-facing institution in Solidarity, right? This pan trade union that's going across the working classes largely. They kind of went back and forth, to your question. They went back and forth between, okay, we're going to recognize you because holy fuck, there's too many of you. We can't just ignore you. But they went back and forth between negotiating with them, the government, and repressing them, right? It was kind of tense back and forth between them. What happened was they replaced the communist leadership, the first secretary. He got tossed out of there by 1981, and they brought in a new guy, a general, Jaruzelski, who became prime minister and party leader, and he came in from the military to bring in a harder line. And so once he came in, negotiations basically stopped, and essentially crackdowns and repression were the name of the game. By the end of 1981, on New Year's Eve, they declared martial law. So to your answer, what are the Russians doing? The Russians replace the leadership, go with a harder line, and then a few months later, boom, martial law is imposed. And so Solidarity is now outlawed. The leadership is arrested or interred. Mass arrest, military rule, suspension of civil liberties. Now there's tanks and curfews across the cities, and censorship and surveillance gets intensified. And they say, hey, we're imposing martial law for your benefit, for your safety.
It's always,
right?
always for our benefit.
It's always for your own fucking benefit.
So generous. They're so generous.
Yeah. And so at that point, basically it got shut down and there was martial law, and boom, this whole movement that had been kind of building over the last 5 or 6 years, right? We're starting to really coalesce and come together, stopped dead in its tracks. So I think I want to pause here, right? I think we want to kind of shift over a little bit to what we talked about yesterday, right? So again, my relative who was kind enough to give us some of her time that we could talk about what it was like during this. So Adam, I knew some of this from talking to my family, and I just know some of it from being the son of immigrants, right, who fled this and sought a new life in the West. I'm curious to hear that whole conversation we had where we asked her, what was it like? Right? What did it feel like? What were you involved? What was going on? What was your main takeaway from all that?
I never had looked at it as like the evolution from, because of her age at that time, from being young to getting to college to 20s, how you're a child and it's not that meaningful. You're under strict conditions, but you're a child. You're still going to play with your friends. You're still hanging out. It's no big deal. You don't really experience, because basically your freedom is tied to your parents when you're a child. My kids, the freedoms they get are the ones I let them have.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, as you get older and you enter more and more of the world around you, you start seeing where those freedoms start stopping by others other than just your parents. And okay, you're educated. Okay, I'm gonna have this whole life ahead of me, and then it's like, no, you don't. No. You have the life we want you to have, and then it becomes this crazy realization, like, wow, this is where it's gonna end. And she's really focused, I noticed, a lot on that there was no hope. That there was no hope for anything grander than whatever that you were told to have, and that was not worth staying around for.
Yeah, no, that was kind of the main one that struck out of me as well, right? And I never really thought of it that way, when you're a kid, you don't know enough to question, right, necessarily the world around you and the opportunities in front of you. And then once you kind of, you first fight that as a teenager, and into becoming a young adult on your own, right? You fight your parents against that, right? So I look forward to hearing about your fights against those freedoms that you're giving your kids. I'll share mine with you too. But yeah, then you become a young adult, and that's kind of, I always love that question, what radicalized you? And for me, it's well, I had to work a job and pay rent and go, what the fuck is all this? Right? It's kind of that sharp, come to Jesus moment of, oh, this is what the real world is like. And that was what she's told us, right? Is that suddenly, as a kid, you think everything's normal. You got what you got. You're happy with it. And then you kind of become an adult and you go, fuck, is this it? Right? And wait a minute, I can't do the things that I want to as an adult now that I have my own life and I'm trying to build my own, existence here. And this is it.
Yeah. It's like the joke where a kid gets, their first paycheck and they're like, who's this FICA guy?
Yep. Except FICA in this case is armed soldiers pointing weapons at you and telling you that what you can and can't do and think, and the rest of you don't agree with it.
You'll take it and you'll like it. And if you don't, well, see that guy over there? He'll take you in the back and you'll like it.
Yeah. But I think it was interesting what she said, right? That is that Poles in this time, right, as opposed to Hungarians or Czechoslovakians or Bulgarians or Romanians, right, who were all under this post-war Soviet occupation in some way, shape, or form, actually had more freedoms than the others around them. They actually had freedom of movement because they could get a passport and visit other countries. They could visit the West, which I didn't realize when she told us that she got to visit France and Belgium and kind of see how other people lived, which was wild to me. I didn't realize that ever happened. Yeah. I thought it was, just again, raised in America with, this staunch anti-communist view that gets, kind of is the name of the game
the
here.
Iron Curtain. You think it's an Iron Curtain. They would think it had a door for Poland.
Right. There's kind of this weird exception to the rule. And that, to me, again, and when we asked her, well, why do you think that is? She's like, well, we're very rebellious people and stubborn by nature. We kind of, you either had to give us a pressure release valve, right, to kind of blow off some steam because we wouldn't tolerate it otherwise. And it's kind of okay, I get that, right? And you see that's where governments, even authoritarian and totalitarian ones, will give you just enough. They'll give you a taste of freedom. They'll give you a taste of what it is you want without actually giving it to you. I thought that was really interesting.
And you know what? Also, in that view of, because they like to, they'll give you a fight. It's well, if they leave and don't come back, that's just one less person to argue with.
Yes, exactly. It's hey, you got to see what's going on, but now we need you to get to work.
Right. Or if you don't
pay your
because
rent.
then you're going to be one less person in the street fighting with us, where everybody else kind of gives in after a while. You're not giving in so much. So if you don't come back, who gives a shit?
But that wasn't even that much, right? Because they would go after your family. So unless you had no actual ties, right? Yeah, you can go visit France, you can go visit Belgium. But by the way, we're not letting the whole family go, which is one thing she said, right? They split up the trips for the family because they left behind so that you would come back. Also, even if you were by yourself and you fled, well, guess what? You still have parents, you still have cousins, and the threat is there that if you try to fuck around and you don't come back, we're going to take it out on your family and they're going to suffer because of you. And, few people want to take that risk and do that.
I also didn't realize like there was refugee camps for people who had just escaped and waiting for permission to go elsewhere, to get those visas to go to other countries. I mean, I'm still curious, because she didn't have to like go through that process. But I'm curious to know like what kind of conditions they lived through in order to, because they had to spend a significant amount of time waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize that either. I never knew that, right? I learned something yesterday, which is, and so for our listeners, people who fled, at least the Polish experience of people who fled the Soviet occupation and tried to seek asylum in the West, they actually had refugee and asylum camps set up in West Germany, in Italy, and Austria. Did she say Sweden as well? I think she may have said Sweden as well. There were basically these refugee camps where you would go to seek asylum. And at that point, you would apply to the US, you would apply to Australia, you would apply to Canada for asylum and refugee status, and so that you could then move to one of those countries. And Adam, I thought that was fascinating. And the trick was what she said, and you asked this, right? It wasn't like college; you just apply to all of them and hope for the best, right? And to pick the best one that approves you. It was you had to choose one. You had to choose a path right there, and then once you got approved, you didn't even have you still were going through this asylum and, I guess green card, right, this immigration process that would still take years. And even once you got provisionally approved, you still had to finish that process and get your citizenship, but you would be assigned randomly to a location. Mm-hmm. And you might get sent to California, you might get sent to Minnesota, you might get sent to Texas, you might get sent to New York, and you didn't have any say in the matter. Right. You had to do what they told you because, again, you were a refugee and you were going through the process and going for asylum, which I found, fascinating. I thought that, people would get on a plane, come here, and then turn themselves into immigration, right, and try to go through the process. I didn't realize that they sat in camps on the European mainland waiting for a response.
Yeah, that's why I was comparing it to like the NFL draft. They're like, okay, you going there, you don't have a choice. That's where you're going to stay for a few years. After a few years, once you become like a citizen, you could choose where you want to go after that. After your contract expires, you could then move to another place if you want to. And most of them it sounded like they didn't move because they, after a few years, you just establish ties to somewhere. You're not like, all right, let's pick it up and move again. It doesn't make much sense. You just spend all this time coming here. You had to pick up from the country you knew. You're going to set up roots here. After a few years, you're going to probably stay for the most part. In that part.
Yeah, you've already left everything behind once. Are you really going to do that again just to, unless you have a good, compelling reason to? No, you're not. You're going to want to probably stay and build roots and, build your family and get a home and all that sort of stuff. It's wild. Yeah, I didn't realize that's why I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah, right.
It's why I was born here, and it's why I never realized that's why that
your
was
dad
the
was
case.
a number one draft pick. He got to go to the New York.
Yeah, crazy, right? Funny how that works.
One of the few, like when you get drafted by the team you want to get drafted by, you're like, yes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so weird. But yeah, I remember. I thought the other one that was interesting that she talked about, right, is, and we asked about the experience with police and their approach. And what was her immediate response is, we hated them. And we hated them because they represented the regime. They represented the government, which I think is a critical thing as we think about protests here in the U.S. And this has been so, especially since the whole Michael Brown thing and the Ferguson riots, policing has become such a controversial thing in America, or at least your opinion of policing and view of it. I was raised that way, is like the police work for the government. They work for the state. They're not your friend. Right. But so many people are like, even who don't have anything to do with the police, are like, they have a back the blue sticker. Right on their car, or they fly the flag, or they're just pro-police in general. It's interesting to me, the difference between, they fundamentally knew and saw the police as the enemy of the people because the police represent the government, as they do here, right? The police work for the government. They represent the actions and decisions of politicians and the law. And if you think the law is unjust and the government is unjust and you have to protest against it, then yeah, by default, the police are the street level folks for the government. But she gave that caveat that, like, even then, some of them were just like, hey, I'm really sorry. I got to do this. I got to ask you, you know that they're going to go after my family. I just got to do my job. Right. There was an element that they were apologetic about it and like not dicks about it. Which, you know, so there was still that, like, not a cab. Right. Not all cops are bastards. Some of them are still good people fundamentally, and they're kind of, but it's going to be a mixed result depending on what you do. But fundamentally, they saw it as an organization, as something that to be, you know, not to be a fan of ultimately. And that's not something we do here in the States. I think that's a critical thing, right? Because for doing kind of the background research on this, successful revolutions have to have some component of security state defection to them, right? You have to have the cops or the military or whoever go, we're not shooting protesters. We're not shooting. These are our people. We're on their side, or we're not with whatever the latest order from the government is to crack down. And we're not at that point collectively here in America, right? Police very much toe the line, are ready with riot gear, even when the situation doesn't call for riot gear, and are ready to crack down. That's, I think, going to be a key turning point here in the U.S. is when enough people go on the protesting side, right? They'll just say they're anti-cop, to realize that there's enough people within the ranks of the police that we should be courting them and not fighting them. And then conversely, enough people in the ranks of the police forces that go, yeah, I'm not on board with this bullshit. Right. And we're with the people and not the government.
I don't know, when you were talking before, it just painted a picture of a guy, like a cop, just like punching somebody. And then after that, I'm really sorry I have to do that. Punching him again and be like, I'm really sorry. I don't want to have to do this. And then boom, I punch him again.
You say that, and I think now of like a pair of siblings, and it's like, why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? While they're grabbing their arm.
Good times.
Yeah. Well, I think the other one that she touched on when I asked that question, she brought this up on herself, was about secret police. And she's like, they were snitches and we hated them universally. And there was a difference between cops and military and the secret police, right? I don't know what the name is. I probably should have looked it up, right? But they had their own version of the Stasi. They had their own version of the KGB. Hey everyone, Rich here. It's not the KGB, it's the NKVD, which is the successor to the Cheka that we talked about in our part 1 episode of concentration camps and the history of them. So that's been bugging me since I recorded this, so hopping in here to correct that. And as penance, I'm going to say what the name of the Polish secret services were, because, again, I'm a fraud. It's just security service. Of course, as punishment, I will pronounce it in Polish, which is Służba Bezpieczeństwa. There you go. Enjoy. Back to your show. That was kind of infiltrating. And she said that there were informants, they were in schools, they were in workplaces, and they were there to report on what people said back to the government. And I think about, we touched on this in our conversation with her yesterday, talking about the media, and you've got progressive control and consolidation going to fewer and fewer folks, and more of it is being monitored and tracked, right? There's, what's his face? The Oracle guy.
Larry Ellison or his son?
Larry Ellison, right, owns Oracle, and he owns the servers, and now his son has control of CBS, Skydance, and progressively more of these media enterprises. And so now they're working kind of hand in hand more and more. And you've got this rollout of AI, which we've already had the big data thing going on for over 20 years, right? Post 9/11, Palantir, and all these other companies were already trying to aggregate big data for the security state, right, through the Patriot Act, to already kind of attack our rights and freedoms. And we don't have a right to privacy through the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. And so it's this legal gray area that's largely been under the auspices of the Patriot Act, where yeah, do we have a fundamental right to privacy? And it kind of falls under that whole Fourth Amendment right, freedom from illegal search and seizure, right? That you need a warrant to basically have the state go after someone. But it is largely a gray area. It's like, okay, well, you don't need a warrant, but we can collect the data. And then when we get the warrant, we just pull the data because we already have it.
Right.
Becomes this thing. And so we're just in a dangerous spot, because it was one thing to have snitches amongst you sowing discord. It's another to know that everything we're listening to, everything we're looking at is being actively tracked and cross-referenced and can easily be pulled through an algorithm, right? Searching for subversive thoughts and ideas and conversation at any time to put us on a list.
It's ironic is that, snitches or all this data, and it's like the ultimate woke cancel culture.
Yes.
And it's like, we're slowly trying to embrace that, which is once again the, what was the term you used before that I like so much?
Every accusation is a confession?
Yes, is a confession.
Yeah.
We hate the woke cancel culture, so we're going to turn it up a notch. We're going to cancel everyone who doesn't do what we say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's kind of bringing me to the other thing that she said. And again, we didn't even prompt this one. She brought up on her own, was just anyone who was protesting, whether it was working class people, whether it was students, whether it was professionals, they were immediately labeled as hooligans and criminals and not legitimate protesters, right? And what do we see every time that people stand up and say something? They're labeled as hooligans, they're labeled as protesters, they're labeled as violent, they're labeled as Antifa now. What did we see during the They hate America. What did right-wing media, what did Fox News and Newsmax call the No Kings protest on October 18th? They were like, this is the Hate America rally. These are illegals. This is Antifa. They're rioters. They're violent. And it's like, this is just people standing up with a sign for 2 hours, right, expressing their displeasure.
Yeah, and George Soros funded them all, funded that grandma who's out there with the sign.
Yeah, it's never acknowledging that people en masse have legitimate grievances, right? It's always delegitimizing their grievances. And it doesn't matter if it's a good old American democracy or if it's Soviet occupation communism. It's the same exact fucking playbook when it comes to how they treat and label protesters.
And there's always now more of a reason. It's like, they're not American. Okay, so now the Democrats won some elections over the last couple of days ago. Great. Those were people like, that was, accepted, and, they're all blue people. They don't know any better. They're going to be crazy, all that stuff. It's not a big deal. And then it's like later on, it's like, oh, they might actually win. No elections for them. Because they're trying to steal it. They're going to steal your election, so we're not going to have any.
Yeah.
Oh, it's always a reason why what you wanted didn't go right.
Yeah. I think the last point that she made when we interviewed her, and that really stuck out at me, and this is one that I knew about the Soviet Union, but I never realized about the Polish occupation as well. And I think we see it progressively more and more here, is this propaganda of success, right, that comes from the government. And I feel like, especially in our media, we see this most often. You see it with Carolyn Levitt right now as the press secretary, right at the White House. You saw it with Sean Spicer. You get this kind of like, oh my God, how can they be like this? How can they lie? And it's like, my brother in Christ, everyone lies when they're the press secretary for the White House, right? Their job is to give you the administration's preferred narrative. So what was his name? St. Pierre, who was Biden's, all of Obama's. They all lie. They lie for a living. Their job is to lie to the press and to sell a story that's going on. But we're moving in that direction, right? It's not just this bifurcating of our society as moving to the extremes, and we're losing this common ground in the middle where we see each other as people and can communicate with each other. And also our media following that same playbook. But now at this point, it's hilarious following the official government accounts on social media. It's hilarious seeing them put up these, the Democratic shutdown,
Yeah.
right? The Democrats shut down the government on every single federal website that you go to at this point. You've got Donald Trump out there going, America's so hot. It's the best country. We're on fire. How good we are, this and that, and all this crap that he puts out there. And it's like, well, we know it's not. This is exactly what they said during Biden's administration when they were like, hey, the economy is great. And everyone's like, no, it's not. Like, we're making more money, but everything costs triple, right? What our gains were. Like, this is not a good economy. Things are expensive and we're not able to benefit more from it. And you've got same shit going on now with inflation continuing under Trump. Now we've got more mass layoffs, right? October had some of the largest sets of layoffs in 22 years. We're on the precipice of economic collapse at this point, and more things are great. America's great. What is the lie? We brought down medicine prices 1,600%. Okay, so they're negative now. Like the math doesn't work, but they keep putting this shit out there, and enough people believe it, but plenty of people don't. And it's like the official government line, this propaganda of success, isn't matching reality and what we're seeing on the ground. I think that's a lot of the reaction that we saw with the voting results from this week, from Tuesday, right? Is just that people are living in a reality that is different from what the government is saying. And that is, it's always been the case to an extent, but it has been growing, right? It grew under Biden. It's growing under Trump. And I think it's just widely grown since COVID. I think that we can put that as a fair starting point for when things start to go off the rails.
Yeah, I think, they go about trying to uneducate you as much as they can. And eventually it will backfire. They just hope they're not around when it backfires. The fact that most people don't understand inflation. So you have people who weaponize that and take advantage of it. And then when it's their turn, they try, you have the same issue. But at least you got that power for a while and probably got rich during that time period. I don't know. It just seems really, really simple. The solutions to a lot of these things are super easy and simple. You just have to do them and explain to people why you have to do what you do and do it. And that's the hard part, is the action. But, I mean, guys, like, we just waste our time repeating the same things over and over again. And you got to see that these people just want to make money. All they want is their money. They want their paycheck. They could give a shit about your inflation. They could give a shit about your job losses. They'll care about it when it's a lot of people and it's already been too late and too many people have suffered for no reason. And that's why you have these protests. People start protesting like, okay, now it's gone too far. Well, why did you let them even go out and protest in the first place? Why didn't you do something? You saw it coming.
Yeah.
It's just like the same cycle over and over again. We waste so much time on it and without really progressing in any way.
I think about, I'm sure you've heard this line, but from Martin Luther King Jr., right, is the riot is the language of the unheard. Mm-hmm. And I think progressively that's what we're starting to see, right? We're seeing more protests because people don't feel heard. Now, again, we just had elections. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see if we continue to build on this, or if what happens every time, we saw this after that kind of blue wave after the repeal of Roe v. Wade, where people kind of go, all right, cool, I voted, everything's better now, right? Everything's fixed, and then don't show up to the next election at that point and stop protesting actively. I'm really genuinely curious to see if this energy continues. I'm guessing that it will, because I don't see Trump backing down at any point, right? The way this administration has been playing out these first 10 months of its term, I don't see them changing course.
Right.
I think they're going to continue to double down. They're going to try to get as much done before the midterms in 2026 as they are capable of achieving, and to make as many permanent gains as possible. And so if that continues, then the opposition, right? Again, when we talk about the ratcheting effect of violence, it's the same thing with the electoral process and kind of nonviolent politics. The more you continue to ratchet up, the more the opposition, equal and opposite reactions. that continue to happen. I don't see them backing off. I see it continuing, but I'm genuinely curious to see how that plays out, because if people just think, they wash their hands of it, go, cool, I voted, I'm done. Job well done, everyone. We're fucked.
I would think, if anything, this would encourage them to step up things and make it move faster, because they're like, okay, Blue had some victories this time around. We can't allow this to happen in 2026. So let's step up the pace and make sure it doesn't happen.
And Ben, I think you talk about this all the time. Is it because they choose to do things that are objectively good for the people and they get them on their side? Or is it that they're going to continue this agenda of trying to achieve what they want to achieve, regardless of the impact on people?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be good for many.
Yeah. So I don't think we want to blue ball our listeners. Long story short, martial law in Poland, Crackdown, things kind of went underground for a few years, but there continued to be some political killings that happened that kept people kind of riled up for the most part. It was kind of simmering under the surface. And then starting by the mid-late 80s, economic stagnation continued. There was more isolation on the international stage, and they still had support from the Pope. Again, the Pope was still Polish, right? And they kind of had the Catholic Church in Rome as an ally for what's going on. So they started to protest again in the mid-late 80s, apologies. The new government of Poland, the Soviet authorities, weren't able to get things back on track economically. Eventually, they came to the table with solidarity, agreed on open democratic elections. It was a sweep for solidarity. And then from there, they were able to basically start to form a coalition government as the first non-communist government under the Eastern Bloc in August of 1989. So a massive achievement at that time. And then, of course, I think, 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself fell. But in December of 1989, Poland itself became a republic once again. So it kind of had its own government at that point. And then that, of course, once that domino fell, the rest of the dominoes, right? Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania, that's when the wall falls. And that's obviously the huge one that everyone remembers at this time.
Yeah, see, you give these non-communists an inch, they try to take a mile. They take it all.
That's right. You give these pro-democracy people just even a littlest bit, and they're just going to run.
Yeah, you can't give the libtards anything. You can't give them anything.
I wish I hadn't been taking a sip from my drink at that moment, because holy fuck.
But the only thing that concerns me nowadays is that the largest just powers that be, Russia and China, have not given up their dictatorship communist ways. Russia is kind of back to where it was. It just is a little lighter. China is doing its thing, and now the United States looks like it's like, well, I kind of like that Russia-China thing going. Maybe we should get a little of that over here. And that's a little concerning, that once these big guys turn, doesn't look like nobody's turns back.
The problem is that there's still structures for power, right, and authority, and the ability to wield it. These guys look at these situations that happen as a threat, and they learn from them, and they start to project forward and look at what's going to happen next and try to get ahead of it as much as possible to shut this shit down. So it's a warning to authoritarian regimes, right, that this stuff can and will happen and that they can be overthrown, but they're not stupid, right? They learn from them and they do their best to negate them without having to give up any of their power.
Yeah, it seems like it worked.
Just like they let the Poles travel and have passports, right? Passports that they would confiscate upon return to the country. And they, of course, wouldn't let whole families travel together, but they gave them just enough freedom to do that pressure release valve, right? To give them something. And so you can have Chinese people today travel abroad, right? They're not stuck in communist China. Right. But I generally don't know if they confiscate passports, if they restrict whole families from traveling, or what it is. Then again, they have a stronger economic basis right now, right, under the Chinese Communist Party than any Eastern Bloc nation did, right, under the Soviet Union's auspices. So, different situations.
Yeah, I guess, but it's like, you see Vladimir Putin, he's like, oh, this guy wants to run against me? Okay, kill him. Or I'll win by like 1% less this time. Oh, is that okay? Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, sorry, yeah, that's a great idea, great idea.
I think almost North Korea would be a better parallel these days, right? I mean, they're the hermit kingdom for a reason, right? They just cut off the outside world entirely, and these people live in isolation. It's almost like he took one look at this lesson and said, all right, as long as I have total control and don't let my people know anything what's going on outside, then it's better. He also keeps them under a total state of wartime readiness, right? Again, we never stopped the Korean War. It's just an armistice. There's never a peace treaty that was signed. And so he always kind of keeps that the U.S. is going to come back and look at what they did. They killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands last time they were here. They're going to get you. They're like, I'm going to protect you.
But look how many years they've been doing this, and nobody's like, hey, look, we should protest. We should rise up. Then because they're like, he's just going to kill us. What's the point?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think that speaks to culture at the same time. And I think one thing that, my family member mentioned was, right, the Poles were a very rebellious people by nature. You got to look, like, are Koreans rebellious by nature, right? Or are they more deferential to power and to authority or whatnot? I don't know, right? I know South Korea, we think of South Korea as this like economic, very Western, very advanced. Dude, they were under military rule for ages, right? They were under a military junta. So, and then dictatorship. So you can't just be like, it's one way or the other, right? It's the way that the culture wants it to run. And if, I think for the Poles specifically, being under the thumb of a hated neighbor, a hated ethnic group, definitely contributed, right, to their unwillingness to continue under that path. When we bring it back to the U.S. here, we're definitely widening as a society, right? We're losing kind of the common middle ground, but is there enough hatred or disgust with what's going on to kind of push people in a specific direction? I don't know. I don't think there is yet, at least.
Yeah, I hope so. Just take it a day at a time, one day at a time.
All right, my friend, any last thoughts?
I don't think so. At least I still have my thoughts. At least I'm still entitled to them. Until they put the chip in my brain and regulate that too. And monitor that. I cannot wait for Elon Musk's Neuralink to basically be the thing that shuts us all down. I can't think this way. My brain's gonna snitch on me. The chip's gonna snitch. That's what it's gonna be called. The chip's gonna snitch.
Yeah, what is it? It's I invented the Torment Nexus as a cautionary tale, and its tech bros are like, at long last, we finally created the Torment Nexus from the book, the classic sci-fi, Don't Create the Torment Nexus.
Classy. A bunch of classy people we are.
All right, so don't get any computer chips. Frank Herbert, Dune writer, wrote about that, right? Don't turn yourself into a machine. Don't turn your thinking over to a machine. You know what? Just firebomb one of OpenAI's data centers. Just go ahead. Just go maybe, if you got a Molotov, just toss it in there. Just give it a little light, a little, overhand throw. Maybe you got some salt water, right? You want to take more of a long-term corrosive approach to damaging these things. Just go ahead. Go right. Just toss it right over the fence.
Or
you got
just
this.
Use some holy water and shake it. See what happens.
Why not? All right, buddy. Thanks for your time. I'll catch you later.
Buddy.
See you, everyone. Peace.
Idiot Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.